Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Inside Whitehall with me, Jonathan Gullis.
And me, James Starkey.
We're laughing, ladies and gents, because in the first take I managed to call myself James Starkey, much to the horror that I was defecting to James Starkey, and James would therefore become me, which is
Not
something we always
defection,
promise.
we'd guessed before.
The, although our partners might have suspected it was inevitable.
That's true. That's true.
So there we go. Well, look, James. I'm knackered. I've been pounding the streets of Gorton and Denton. It's been one hell of a time. It was an absolute fascinating experience to be on the ground on the by-election day. I have never seen so many activists from three parties pounding the pavement side by side, constantly crossing over one another in big groups. I mean, there must have been easily between the main three contenders about 3,000 to 4,000 activists on the streets. I think the local people of Gorton Denton are delighted to see the back of every single one of us with the amount of litter that's gone through their doors and the amount of banging that they've had at all hours of the day and night when it comes to people asking how they intend to vote. And you could tell when I was knocking from 7 p.m. that people were definitely at the phase of we're just not going to acknowledge the door exists at all the people standing outside our house, even no matter how desperately they tried various ways. So, look, I think what's important, however, is James. This was a seismic, in my view, by-election, probably one of the biggest in my entire time on this planet. And so I'm keen to get your view. We'll obviously talk a bit about Green, what it means for the Green Party, what it means for Labour, what it means for Reform, and a bit about the others, Advance UK, the Conservatives, Liberal Democrats too. But also look at, I think, stuff that you've got a great background on, James, which is polling. And so let's get into that first of all. We had a number of constituency opinion polls. It seems to have accurately picked up what was going on with the Reform vote, but like we saw in Caerphilly, has been way off with what the progressive vote it was Plaid in Caerphilly, and this time it was Green in Gorton and Denton.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting talking to you and trying to get a feel for what was going on the ground up there, and then the kind of data we had out. What was the in a by-election? The data's kind of quite limited. So couple things I think are interesting. So one, as you said, I think in future we're going to need to remind people that, as you said, in these two consecutive by-elections, the progressive vote, if you want to call it that, the Plaid and then Greens in this election, has been massively like by a long way. By a
10
long way.
points plus. 10
By
points
10
plus
points
in
plus.
both.
And so that's not been captured, and I think that has consequences. We'll see how any polling release goes around the devolved elections. That'll be interesting as well. I certainly think in any by-elections between now and the next election that it should all come with a health warning. And let's not forget, in the last general election, the Labour national vote share was wildly overestimated by a number of pollsters. So they got that wrong as well. They got lucky because they got the story right that Labour was going to win, but they actually got the numbers quite wrong. So I think that's interesting. Labour themselves, I mean, something we can delve into. You've done by-elections. You've done a lot of electioneering. The interesting thing is, a journalist said to me this week, apparently Labour's data's not very good, and they were surprised because it's such a safe constituency. And I said, well, in my experience, that's kind of normal. If a constituency hasn't really changed hands for 20 years, often the data's bad. So I thought the information environment around this was very cloudy. It didn't seem to me the parties themselves were particularly confident
Well,
either.
to back you up on that, James, there's been a number of briefings from quote Labour sources who were close on the ground in the campaign. I think we can fairly suspect those were the people from HQ who were on the ground, or indeed the MPs helping run the campaigns, and they were openly basically saying that the data they had was just so inaccurate, and they were working with the data that they had said to them they were genuinely in the race, and
They
so
also spent this week briefing they'd won, incredibly.
Yeah, I know, and I think they obviously were doing it off, but in part, bad data, and whether or not that data, how intrinsically it was kind of investigated when it was going entered, were people stress testing it, were people questioning it? It doesn't seem that happens. I mean, to back you up, there was one particular road I was on about 7 p.m. and we were knocking up certain target doors. So at that point, we're just knocking the ones who we haven't spoken to. So there's about 5 doors on a street, long street, but 5 doors. The Labour activists, there were 6, 7 of them, and they were basically knocking every door, and that
Mm.
sent off my spidey senses because I was like, I've been in by-elections where you're feeling a bit desperate, and you start suddenly getting orders from HQ. These are undecided. Now go and ask them have they voted, and if they did, who they vote for. And a case of we don't know if this person even votes Labour or not, but you know what? We're going to take the gamble
Well,
because we
hang
think they
on.
might be a target voter.
I want to stop you there. Like, I think for people listening, watching, there'll probably be some people with campaign experience. But I'd worked around politics, and you're the person who kind of helped me understand this, and then going on a few by-elections over the past 2 or 3 years myself. I think what people should remember is on any election, by-election, general election, there's I think people in Westminster confuse some of the things that are going on. So what do we have? We have your leafleting. When you're just going up to a door and you're putting a leaflet through a door, that's often untargeted. You'll just leaflet a street. You know, you'll park up
Every
on a
house,
street
yeah.
and you'll go down every house, whether you're a Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, and that's why it'll reform. And that's why, because the streets get leafleted so often, some people will have a little sign up saying, "I don't want your leaflet, mate. No junk mail."
Yeah.
And if you make a mistake, they'll come out and remind you the sign's there in a maybe not particularly polite way, understandably, if they've put a sign up.
I'm a
But
chancer, James. I always take my luck. I always try my hand when it comes to this thing.
Well, so we've got that. So that can be kind of indiscriminate. But then what you're doing is you've got data, which is the party HQs will have databases which they use, buy data from people like Experian, I think, to match over, to look at where their demographics might be. So they'll have an understanding of, let's just use, I don't know, for this one, let's just use Labour. So Labour will say, we know in this area our voters tend to be this social class, these types of jobs, and therefore live in these areas. And they'll do some targeting. And then they'll have data collected over years and years of people knocking on doors and saying to someone, who might you vote for in the upcoming election? And they'll mark down if that's a Labour person or a don't know or undecided or don't vote or a Conservative or whatever. Now, that data can be bad. It's collected by people who are, in the politest way, amateurs. They've had some training probably by Party HQ, but they just go out in election time. They're very enthusiastic and they try their best, but it's not.
It's a judgment
perfect.
call, yeah. You're asking people to use their judgment and
Which
to
therefore
interpret.
can vary.
Yeah.
And the thing that I realised is often what people do is knock on a door and put a house down as Conservative when people are normal. In my household, people don't all vote the same way.
Same as mine.
So we both live in households where if they knocked on the door, they would get 2 different people, 2 different votes. So you've got the quality of that data, so part of that is to work out what's going on. But obviously the aim is on polling day. Therefore, you've refined your data. On polling day, you really should only be knocking up people you are very sure are your people, because critically, you don't want to remind someone who's not going to vote for you to go out and vote for the other party if they've forgotten. Let them forget. So to your point, I think what you're capturing is if on polling day or even the day before, people are indiscriminately knocking on doors, that tells me their data's probably bad, but that more tells me it's total panic. We don't have enough
100%.
votes, because that's a kind of crazy thing to do in theory. There's no real logic behind it, so it's pure panic. So that's why
exactly.
You're saying you saw this and thought these guys are in a panic. They don't think they clearly do not think they're winning at that point, right?
Exactly. And there was also a case of, look, even with reform data, right, there was some households that we were going up to that we thought might vote for us. And we tried our luck there. And I suppose what I found quite shocking, and look, to be perfectly frank, these were predominantly nearly all households that were people from a British, Pakistani or Bengali background that I was on in Gorton. And everyone said Green. No one to me at that point said Labour, which made me think that, look, people are talking about it. I certainly think it happened. There is a sectarian block vote that was going on, and it was moving heavily towards the Green Party. And it was the combination of certain areas of Denton where we were walking up white working class voters who were undecided. They were pitching more Green, plus seeing the block vote with the Muslim community, and then seeing Labour's activity on the polling day. as I remember, I called you, James, at 7 o'clock and said, look, my gut is definitely Green Reform and Labour. I think Labour's just been losing way too many votes on the day.
Mm.
And I think in Labour's case, the problem is this combination of poor data, that they haven't campaigned the seat hard enough over all the years they've had it. So therefore, they haven't seen whether or not people's voting patterns have shifted much. And also, I think there's an element of, and I've seen it because I know it happened to Labour in Stoke-on-Trent. Voters will just say to Labour people, "Oh yeah, I'm backing Labour," because they've always said that to the Labour canvasser, and they're being polite. And the problem is, you're asking the person on the door to interpret: are they telling you the truth or not? I remember in the general election, as I said, I think before on the pod, in 2024, people were saying to me, "Oh, we really like you. You've done a really good job." And I remember I could just tell because I'd knocked enough doors that they were just saying, we're not going to vote for you, but thank you for all the hard work you've done. Whereas other people were going, oh, this is great for us. And I was going, no, no, no. Once they're being polite to you, as John Redwood told me, that's when you're done.
Yeah.
That's when it's over. You know, you want them angry. And I don't think Labour, I didn't see when people in Labour were having chats on doors, angry responses. I think people were being polite and going, oh, yeah, yeah, I voted. And then Labour going, oh, you voted for us. And yeah, I voted. And then again, experienced canvassers know that means they didn't vote for you. Inexperienced means that they will say they have voted for you, and suddenly the data's all over the place. But what I will say is the Green Party definitely had the most activists on the ground throughout the day. In fact, I was ironically door knocking all around where the Green Party HQ was. So I got regularly spotted, and actually everyone was very friendly and polite. It was very, everyone used to say hi to each. We all said hi to each other as we crossed over on the roads in the pouring rain. But look, you could see again body language. I saw Labour activists, shoulders down. They were quiet as they were walking down the streets. There was none of what you saw with the Greens. There was chatting, there was laughing, there was a bit of humour, there was smiles on faces. And that again just said to me, if you've had a long day on doors, you get very quickly a sense of, is this for us or against us? And I think those Labour activists are starting to realise, well, the penny was dropping. But as you say, James, what is bizarre is that no one thought Labour would win it until about a week and a half ago, when Labour themselves decided, and you're the comms expert, I love your advice on this, they started briefing out that they were confident they were going to win, to the point where they've even got Keir Starmer up in the final week to go visit the seat. And even at the close of poll was saying, we think we've won. I think Beth Rigby was quote saying that she has spoken to activists who were saying they were confident they had held the seat and ended up third.
I thought it was incredible. I think I first saw it kind of over the weekend, very beginning of the week, that clearly someone from Labour was briefing that, you know, they were confident. And look, the Prime Minister going up there, you send, obviously, when you've got your leader, and particularly when it's the Prime Minister, you're conscious that, you know, if they go up there and defeat and they you lose, people also kind of pin it on them. You know, they're associated with it. So, you know, there's a reason to, if you think you're going to lose, not send them up there. But certainly if you think it's close enough where you might not win, but it gets a lot of attention. It can get your people out. It pulls a lot of activists out for that day, but it can kind of create a focus. So it can be worth rolling the dice. So I don't have a problem personally with sending a leader up there. I think Reform were briefing this week quite strongly that they didn't think they were going to win, but Nigel Farage went up there because, you know, they wanted to show they were in the fight. Perfectly reasonable. I think the briefing to me that they expected to win it, that seemed insane, because what we now know is they're all miles off. So I find it hard to believe. So if their data was telling them they were going to win by a lot, their data is really bad, and they have actually much more serious problems than comms problems. I think they have both bad data and incompetent staff, frankly, because I think experienced staff from HQ, even if the data was bad in the constituency, would clock that very quickly as they were seeing canvassing returns not match up to data that's on the system and all this kind of stuff. So I think I think someone serious from HQ would have clocked the data's bad. So either they've got off bad data again, like I said, I think that's incompetence, or they weren't really sure. In which case, what have you got to gain about? I was at a drinks, a kind of Westminster drinks, a lot of Westminster people there, including Labour people. I said, I don't get this, and they're like, well, maybe it's kind of close. And I said, well, then you say it's close, because if you say you've won, I'm not very happy with Starmer at the moment or something. I think, well, they've won. I can now vote going Green. without getting reform because Labour have already won. So I couldn't see their logic. I think, and then they said, well, and I said, well, who's doing the comms? And they said, well, no one really, because all of Starmer's main staff have just left, right? So, I mean, it seemed chaotic would be the polite way, I think, probably of putting it. They've got a serious problem. And again, they were saying, well, maybe these aren't people at the centre. Well, if you had a grip, we did really, whatever you think about it, hear quite a continued, coherent narrative, single narrative, come from the Greens, come from Reform, come from the Tories. Didn't hear much from the Dems, but we did hear a consistent narrative, really. I think Reform got a bit excited at the beginning, but after a couple of weeks, it was like, oh, it's going to be challenging. And, with the Greens, they kind of maintained that. So, yeah, I thought it was bonkers. And I think it's, made them look even worse, frankly. And I think, look, you said, let's get into it. It's seismic. They didn't lose. They got battered. And they came third.
Well, just to put it in context again, James. So, yes, we're talking about the results here. Basically, Labour's vote more than halved. More than halved. This is Labour's sixth safest seat in the entire country, a 13,500 majority, a seat that for 100 years has been Labour, that's inside the Greater Manchester Mayoralty, which was just led by the very popular Labour politician, Andy Burnham. Labour threw, just like the Greens and Reform, but Labour threw the kitchen sink at this seat. And obviously decided, however, and I think it's easy to forget, even in the short campaign, spent the first week of the campaign in a bitter row about whether Andy Burnham would even be allowed to be the candidate. I think we can safely say, had Burnham been the candidate, I think at the very least, we can assume that it would have been a tighter race and Labour would have been at worst placed second. And so I think that there's now major questions about was blocking Burnham the right strategy, because even the Greens conceded early on. Burnham not running opened the door to them in terms of trying to get voters.
I think they would have won. I think they probably would have won.
I agree with you.
I think clearly, I think now it looks like it demotivated the Labour base. It emboldened the Greens to think they had a chance, which meant they probably put more resources in it than they would have done if it was Burnham.
Agreed.
So you kind of have a cause and effect thing going on. And so the ramifications are huge, and like that. I think that fallout is going to be with us all the way up to the locals and beyond. I think Starmer's done now. It's just a matter of when.
Oh, I think we can safely say, here, Starmer, it's over. It's over. And any Labour MP, there's a few. Labour MP for rugby is desperately telling everyone to dust themselves off and get behind the boss and. Got some good economic data, and it's all going to be good. Poor John Sligger, he's out there waving flag. Tris Osborne, I'm sure, will tell us that the grown-ups are back in charge. Luke Charters and York Outer or whatever as well will tell us how great Labour's doing. And it's lovely to see the enthusiasm, and I don't bemoan it. You're loyal to your party. You want to go out there. You want to try and put a positive face on it. But the idea that all's well in the camp is going to be completely for the birds. And we've already seen now, look, granted, the same old faces at the moment, if Clive Lewis's, etc., have all come out and said Starmer's got to go. The question now will be, do we see any new faces? Some others on the soft left. I think we can safely say Angela Rayner putting out a tweet saying things need to change. It was probably the most unsubtle, I'm here, chaps and lasses. Just give me a few months to sort out the tax affairs, then I'll be ready to go. But it certainly felt like a firing gun on a future leadership contention there. Where's Streeting? Where is he now? What is he deciding to do? And Andy Burnham, who will now be thinking, do I need to find another mate to step down a different seat? And ultimately, does Keir Starmer even have the authority this time to have the NEC block me based on what's just happened?
I think while it's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, Burnham would have won if it had run. If you're Burnham now, you're going to be looking at any seat thinking, well, maybe I can't win it. So how does Burnham get across, even assuming they allow him? That seems difficult. I don't know what other seats are going to come up in play. But even if someone was willing to stand down in a relatively quote-unquote safe seat for Labour, this was the sixth most safest seat. And
there's only five more to look at.
Only five more. And so, yeah, I think Burnham probably would have won it, but that's easy for us to say, just sat here. And the second thing I'd say is, it clearly wouldn't have been by much, So
Yeah.
it's. I don't think it's the case that in any world Burnham would have kind of himself won by 4,000 or 5,000 votes, because we can see what's starting to go on in the country, and that I think the biggest thing is that, which is, for now at least, this is, if anyone, for a year or two, I think even if it's very close after the election, I've been saying the two-party system is gone. We are in a multi-party world now, and this has crystallised that. And I think people are waking up to a reality that perhaps people like me and you have seen for a while, but they're now digesting the fact that it's not just reform, the upstarts of reform that did well in 24, that have been picking up in the polling. They've been the story, and I think me and you said this last summer when Polanski won. I said to you, if Polanski wins, it's going to be big. And last summer, I don't think people kind of clocked, how big a moment that was. And to be honest, for me, I thought Polanski would come in, shake things up, and I thought he would move the Greens in the polls. But this election, for me, I said to you earlier in the week, was a test. Is it real? Or because I think if they'd have come third, they could have dropped off really quickly. We could have seen their polling numbers go down because people said, well, they're not really challengers. They've now really put 2 feet on the mat and said, no, we're here, we're real, you can vote for us. And I think...
And stop reform. You can vote Green to sack Starmer and also stop reform. They now have got the proof that they can do both things, which is exactly what they needed.
And I think that's going to lead... We're going to have voting... We're going to have to start understanding more and more tactical voting, because that is real, it's going to happen. We've spoken about this as well. I think this seat will lead to some misleading elements of that. This seat, I realise reform will attack the Tories. This seat is a seat that the Tories never would have won in a million years, have never been close to. Okay, people will say they didn't get the deposit on this, but the fact is the narrative was never going to involve the Tories. It was always going to involve, the focus was going to be on reform, Greens and Labour. And, crucially, the votes that got the Greens so far ahead, the Muslim vote, that is in a lot of constituencies, but it's not in every constituency. And so I think there are, and you've been up there and said this. It's a funny constituency. It's not a particularly coherent constituency. It's quite divided.
No, it's a very old constituency. So you've got the Denton part, which is sort of over 90% white British, predominantly working class, the kind of classic reform voter.
What we would call the red wall.
The red wall. And then the Gorton bit, which is parts of Manchester City, wards in Manchester City, that actually 2/3 of the seat residents reside in, and is only 45% white British in terms of ethnic makeup. So therefore, is a completely different kind of seat, literally separated by a single road. It's quite extraordinary when you're there and you see the difference. And I think I was sending you videos on the day, James. If I was in Denton, it was reform posters galore with a smattering of Greens. Don't get me wrong, they had their presence. But you were seeing the streets I was on. There was just row after row of either Labour, Greens, and it was just... but Greens, I think you said to me in reply, you were shocked to see just how strong the Green sort of poster war was against Labour in what was definitely a heartland for Labour.
Because the other thing for me is, talking to people this week, I saw Labour's confidence, and I thought, surely they're a clown show, but they can't be that much of a clown show. And my question mark over the Greens was, we talked about it before. Are they just going out leafleting, having a good time with their mates? It was very obvious within a couple of weeks. You said it. I spoke to journalists that had been up there. That Greens were getting the most activists there. They had absolutely coachloads of people going up on a daily basis, and regular, and a lot of them. And I don't know what they got on polling day, but it was way over 1,000. I think.
It's estimated to be 2,000 on polling day alone.
That is a huge amount of people in a by-election. But I was like, is their data and targeting good? Now, it looks like it very much is. So I think that's a scary thing, that they... enthusiasm is one thing, but they seem to bring a level of organisation. And the left is not very... The left likes to argue, I think, and we've seen this with your party, but we saw with Corbyn, they can organise on the ground. They do know how to make that happen. Corbyn had those huge outdoor rallies, if people remember. And so I was kind of curious whether they could do that, and so it looked, very much looks like they can. So I
By the
think
way,
that has
James, to back up on that,
ramifications.
I think quite a lot of the old Corbyn camp staffers are actually now members of the Green, and most of us suspect advising internally kind of their experiences of what they came across that worked. And I mean, John Craig, I've made me chuckle. Sky News, long-term political reporter of by-elections, was joking that even the Green Party now has comms directors
Yeah,
on the ground. So he goes like, what world are we living in where the Green Party's got that level of HQ staff now,
yeah.
in terms of orchestrating, press
And
conferences,
this will bring
etc.
more
like that.
donations in, right? This will really help their donations.
Yeah, Zach Plansky was alleged on polling day to have been overheard on the train up to Gorton that he was worried they weren't going to win. He subsequently mocked that, having a photo of him with the phone by his ear on the train saying, "Oh, I've just heard that we won a by-election. We've now got thousands of new members." And it's done very well on social media. And again, fair play to Polanski for leaning into things that,
Mm,
I think actually just make him look human, because he is authentic.
mm.
I think that's why he's a serious challenger on the left. And for Labour, to go back to our point there, this by-election has now shown that Labour is hemorrhaging traditional white working class voters in the red wall type seats to reform UK, and then your graduate, your university student, your young professional, they are going to the Greens at the moment.
Mm.
If they're on the sort of the more progressive centre left side of
And we're going to
politics,
have
and I
a
just think
wave. This is. I think this is sent shockwaves through Westminster, but beyond. I think kind of
it was the worst.
businesses.
It was the worst outcome, right, James? Well, you and I said this. The Greens winning, Reform second, and Labour third was the worst possible outcome for this
For
by-election for
Labour,
Keir
yeah,
Starmer.
yeah, for Keir Starmer, but I think then we're going to get another sledgehammer, which is the local and devolved. But I want to ask you something. I've asked you this before, but I think what I think we need to think about is where a Labour MP is going to be at. So we're going to have people like John Slinger and other MPs who I'm sure are heartfelt when they go on and say, we need to calm down and get behind the leader and all that kind of stuff.
I
But
think John Singer, by the way, is authentic himself in that view. I think he's actually
yeah,
being serious.
I think I know him a bit from many years ago, but I think, but there'll be a lot of people going on and they don't really believe it in their heart of hearts. And we've spoken about this. We both kind of around the end of the last government saw the Tory party, and I think so. Some things that always struck me is when there's any kind of elections, it puts everyone back on doors. So all the MPs and the councillors and the kind of people around the party who are influential, particularly the MPs though, they are knocking on doors, hearing direct from voters, and often they can kind of start to get sheltered from that. So I think, for the past few months, Labour MPs will be in Westminster going back to the constituency. They won't be deluded. They won't think things are amazing, but they won't quite perhaps get the level of how dislike the government is and dislike in particular Keir Starmer is. And so they go off and do that. And then I think they look at the numbers. They go home on their own and they sit there with their laptop watching, I don't know, EastEnders or Coronation Street or whatever. And they, with their nighttime microwave supper, I'm making them sound like very sad people. But, they go home with their laptop and they look at the numbers and they go, what happens to my seat? That is what, and tell me if I'm wrong. I think MPs are looking at this, trying to extrapolate, and they'll do this when we have the locals. And even if they'll say, "Oh, my seat's a bit like that," or how, what did the Greens get in my one, or what could Reform get? And basically, there's not really any good news in this. There'll be a lot of Labour MPs looking at this, thinking, "I am in huge trouble," and that's to me is maybe the biggest immediate problem for Starmer in the long term. It's a political earthquake. It's shaking things up. We're end of multi-party system. We're seeing all those articles tonight and tomorrow. I agree with them. But I wonder if the biggest issue with these results in the coming weeks and then in the devolved and the local elections is actually just Labour MPs who really decide Keir Starmer's future. And let's not forget, a lot of the cabinet are in trouble. Shabana Mahmood, Wes Streeting,
They're gone.
and others.
They're gone.
They are gone. Forget on this, just on national polling, they're gone. So they are going to go and look at this and go, if I stick with this guy, I'm done. I'm out of a job. I mean, but you've been there. So am I wrong? Or
No, you're not wrong. I mean, I implore viewers, and James and I have both watched it. Carl Turner, a Labour MP in the Hull area, gave this amazing interview with Nick Ferrari on LBC
Yeah.
this morning. This morning being the 27th of February, for those who want to go back and listen. And the fair play to the editors, done an amazing sort of greatest hits of that interview. And Carl Turner, what I love about it is Carl Turner is being himself, so he's being authentic.
He very much
He's
is.
being. You can see the passion, you can see the frustration, you can see some of the anger, but he also tackles it with, I think, grace and humour as well in what is a difficult time. He says it himself when Nick Ferrari jokes, "Oh, would you want to ever come and cover my show?" And he goes, "Well, I will do if you pay me, because I need to start getting ready for a life outside of politics based on what's currently going on." But that's the truth, and that's what many Labour MPs are going to be sitting at home and looking at. You're entirely right. You know, they'll be asking for breakdown of the ward by ward breakdowns, and then looking at where have I got similar demographics in my own seat. So if you're Angela Rayner in Tameside, which is a seat very similar to the Denton side of things, you're going, and Jonathan Reynolds is in the same situation, you're going, reform's going to matter me here. Like, I could lose reform. And if you're in Lucy Powell, next door in Manchester Central seat, you're thinking the Greens are going to take me out here. So that's the deputy leader, the former deputy leader, the Labour chief whip, and that's just in the Manchester area, let alone Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary in Birmingham, Wes Streeting, a potential leadership challenger, and Health Secretary in London. I mean, it's just, and that's, like you say, those are the people in the top jobs. So then those people who haven't got a ministry to keep them occupied, and if the parliamentary timetable's light, and and it does appear that Labour's not putting much legislation through the House to keep MPs busy, that means they end up all then looking at their data and canvassing at the weekends. They come back to Parliament, they get in the tea rooms, or they get in each other's offices, or they go for lunches, and everyone starts talking about what's your activists saying, what are your members saying, what are your doors like, what's your data showing. As people start sharing screenshots of what their data showing, and eventually everyone it talks themselves in to a frenzy, and it becomes uncontrollable. And you said this before, James, it becomes a snowball effect. And that's why the moment we get 10 non-new names, 10 names that we don't at this moment in time know, put themselves out there and go, here's got to go.
I think we've had mostly the usual suspects out today.
Yeah,
I would say. I mean, Carl Turner was great, but I was on Sky last week, and Carl Turner was saying broadly similar stuff at that point. So, on that point, how we had these conversations, me and you spoke at length when things were going on, but how honest were you with colleagues? I mean, I think to your point, it's at the moment we've got the usual suspects. The Rayner tweet says to me, people like Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner, they are definitely privately thinking, whether I like it or not, even if I'm not starting a coup, I'm a fair chance I'm going to be in a leadership bid in the next 3 months. They have to prepare for. I've been there, in helping someone prepare, and you don't know when it's coming. And I can tell you, I don't know the Labour Party super well, but what I do know is, if you're thinking about running for leader, you need to be doing something right now, because it's going to happen. But how much?
Yeah, exactly. Just so you know, James, just so listeners know, those people have outliers who will start calling people up. What do you think? What's the feedback? And out of interest, like, if we need to replace Keir, who do we replace Keir with? And they're jotting all this down and feeding it into their own little Google Docs. Google Docs is going in overdrive.
Yeah, and so, but how honest were you with colleagues? So if you were in Parliament and you're starting to think, we need to get rid of this person, or I'm really worried, whatever it is. How are you? Do you think?
You're honest with your close friends.
Do you think that Labour MPs are going to go in on Monday, because they're mostly back in the constituency over the weekend, and start saying, because to your point, my impression was always a bit coded. It was always like, I'd really hate to see a leadership thing, but do you think we might need a change at some point or whatever? Like, how does it go?
Everyone's trying to figure out who are what are dubbed the unofficial whips. So the whips office will have people that they tell them, if you sort of act as our spies on the ground, there'll be job opportunities in the future for you, especially in the whips office. So you're trying to figure out
to Belize or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So you're trying to figure out who are the whips, secret whips, essentially.
The snitches.
So you're very coded. So in the tea room, you would sit there and I'd sit there and just listen to what people said, and would go, and literally just that noise. And amazingly, with some colleagues, they would interpret however they wanted from that.
Yeah.
But you just hum. But there is obviously, there's a collection of, I think what you tend to find is you coalesce with MPs that, you've got your mates who you're the most honest with, people that you feel that you can implicitly trust and have the most frank and honest conversations. Then the next tier, I would suggest, from my experience, were MPs in seats very similar to yours,
Right.
because you're keen to find out, is it just my seat or is it happening in everyone else's?
Right.
So a lot of the old red wall, we were getting together and you chat and you have a, in the voting lobby or, in the chamber and sort of comparing notes. And every by-election that took place, you'd be like, oh, what do you think of that? And trying to figure out, Paul Bristow, for example, in Peterborough was an exceptional campaign. And sometimes you'd be like, oh, Paul's doing okay. Maybe I'll be okay.
Yeah.
You start clinging on to every ounce of hope that you can find. And then you have a by-election in your own patch. And you're like, oh, but why is it not happening for me like it's happening in Paul's seat? And then, then it becomes competitive. And then there's that third tier, which is the broader parliamentary party, which you just give the lines to, because you just assume that it's going to get back to the whips and the leader, and you just basically don't. You're trying to. Everyone's playing "I'm a faithful, not a traitor" at that point. So
Yeah.
it's the
So
round
it
table
is a
situation.
real live version of the traitors, basically.
Yeah, basically, basically. And I think that that's what I find fascinating, is just like you say, how honest will those Labour MPs be willing to be? And then for the Greens, and I just, I do think it's an exceptional result. For Zach Polanski, he's massively passed the first test with
Yeah.
flying colours. I think Hannah Spencer as a candidate selection actually is very interesting. I must say, I thought she gave a very good winner's speech. I
But
think.
let me stop you there. I think broadly she gave a speech that could have been given by any party. I mean, that was what was interesting about it. Someone, I think, I'll shout out to a great journalist, Henry Zeffman at the BBC, kind of pointed this out on Radio 4 today. The Green Party didn't really campaign very much on green issues. So
There was not. I think Hannah. I think what she did. I think there was only a couple of times she got asked about net zero, where she was basically like, "Of course we need net zero. I'm a plumber. I know that we've got the leakiest houses in the country, and therefore it impacts the cost of living." It was fascinating how they always managed to bring it back
yeah,
to cost of living, NHS. She talked a lot about fly tipping as well, and litter in the area, which was
but
a
not
problem.
very
I can
much
assure you
about the
that.
environment.
But we did not hear much about solar farms, wind turbines. We didn't hear about CO2 emissions. And to be fair, by the way, that's a theme that's been consistent with Zach Polanski since he's taken over as leader. They're no longer, I think, just the environmental. I think they are positioning themselves as, some people say reform right, reform's the populist right. They are replacing themselves the populist. They are taking over the the mantle
Yeah.
that they feel is there. And when Corbyn and Sultana tearing themselves apart in your party, Zach Polanski's basically gone, well, the field's open. I'm going to go and hoover up these people. And he's winning them over in their droves.
Well, because it was interesting. If I can, if you'll indulge me. So I was kind of talking to a pollster I know, and saying, what do you think they need to do? So one thing that was common with a number of people was whether it was people you and I know, you and I, I'm sure, respect, pollsters, people in the Labour Party. There's just a blanket view, which is Keir Starmer can't do any of this. He's not a capable enough communicator, and is now too tainted. So this person, said to me, I'll read it to you, they need to drop Starmer. I don't think they can turn it around with him. Obviously, the McSweeney-Matteson strategy is wrong. A Labour person I talked about this thought that was a bit unfair. I think they're insinuating they're kind of targeting the reform vote, which they said isn't really true. I'm assuming they have cottoned on by now, and then he criticised some of the Labour Party, which I'll leave out. But Starmer isn't good enough to do the U-turn they need. And he says they've had a very consistent strategy of punching their natural voters in the face as often as possible. This seems to me to be unwise. So I'm not sure how. So then I said, well, what do they need to do? Because I was kind of like, well, what policies, what are we going to see if we get a new leader and they listen to this pollster or whatever? So he said, I don't think they need to change much about policy. It's about rhetoric and narrative and knocking some barnacles off the boat. They seemed ashamed of doing things that their voters would like. Miliband's stuff, rail nationalisation and workers' rights. They've done some very left-wing things, which they seem almost embarrassed about mentioning. They need a narrative, and hell, they needed to have raised taxes at some point so they can deliver on public services. So toss some money at the core voters. And that's only possible by sacking Starmer and Reeves so they can really do a U-turn and get it to be believable. So I thought that was interesting. This person as well, as by the by, described Wes as shuffling the deck chairs because he's been part of cabinet. He thought the only way you could really execute this strategy is Burnham. And
Interesting.
he says his personal opinion is Burnham isn't massively better than Starmer, but in a reset world, you need a kind of a clean break. Burnham's the clean break. Burnham's Carney-ish.
So are we indicating how to fear James? If Burnham were to come in, and again, I know it's hypothetical, and did this, do we see the Carney playbook that we saw in Canada? Burnham comes in the first 3 months, does some very dramatic sort of U-turns on on Labour policy, really repositions the Labour Party politically to the centre left and targeting that soft left slash sort of progressive voter, and then very quickly goes, I appreciate I didn't have a mandate. As you'll know, I wasn't part of the last lot. I wasn't in Parliament. I criticised all the Winterfield blah blah. But now I need my own mandate and try and catch the Greens and Reform on the hop.
I think that's their best chance. I think the only chance I think the problem is, I think we touched on this before, and we definitely will again. If they bring a new leader in, if it's Andy Burnham, as fresh as you can get, what they're going to have is they're going to have a group of MPs who are all unhappy because half of them wanted Wes Streeting, and 20% of them still actually like Keir Starmer. And John Slinger doesn't think they should have got rid of Keir Starmer and his crew, and Wes Streeting's crew think Wes Streeting should be there. And maybe there's a bit more people around Rayner that would be like, well, I kind of wanted Angela, but Burnham's still my cup of tea. But there might be some core Rayner people. Who knows? So you'll have a party divided. When we went through say we, you're not part of us now. Maybe you'll do this one day in your new party. But when the Conservatives went through leadership elections, to me there was always a division that was left over from that election, and that was hard to put back in a bottle, I think.
Yeah, never heals. It never heals.
It doesn't fully heal. So I think they'll have that. There's no more money. So just because you have a new leader, there's not a magic money tree. So they're going to have much similar problems. They're going to have the bond market pressing up against them and not being able to do much spending. They're going to have demands on defence, which Starmer hasn't still worked out, and all this kind of stuff. And so, and that's why I thought what my pollster friend said was interesting, which is actually they could probably find a couple of things that are really unpopular with that group to ditch and do it legitimately. Because, like you said, Burnham could say, "Well, I wasn't here." Actually, I publicly kind of said I didn't really like it. They could big up the things they've already done, so they wouldn't need to do much new stuff.
Yeah,
and maybe come up with one or two things that they want to do. My question is, I think there's not many. I don't think there's many people that get into Downing Street, and when they get told they might not come back, still go and have an election. So, will Burnham and co, assuming our scenario, if you could have this play out, would they really go for an election? I suspect what would happen is they would look at the numbers and think, oh, if I can just have 6 more months or a year, and before they know it, they're less than a year from the end of the Parliament term that's mandatory, and they're still behind in the polls, and and they've got all the same problems. So I suspect there's no easy way out. It might be. I think what I do think is, and you said this for months, Jonathan, months, is I think Keir Starmer himself, and this is not an attack on the guy, genuinely. I think you've met him a few times. He was always pleasant to you, but I think they've made 15 U-turns, which are now just read out by the news as facts. They've made some wildly unpopular decisions. They came in. They made promises they haven't stuck to them. The public think him and Rachel Reeves are liars. He fundamentally, he's so unpopular now. I don't think there's any planet on which he can remotely turn it around. And so I don't think there's any good answers for Labour. But I think whether it's Burnham or Streeting, they're probably better answers than having Keir Starmer.
I mean, there was a journalist who said to me, imagine being a Labour MP and realising that when you told people if you vote Green, you're going to legalise prostitution, legalise crack cocaine, and you're going to have a major economic meltdown, and those voters still went, yeah, I'd prefer that over you lot. Like, that's how bad it's got. And, on the other side of the spectrum, if you vote for those guys in Reform UK, you're voting for fascists and, divisive politics and far right, and all your friends and neighbours could be deported overnight. All the fear-mongering on that side. And again, voters were still willing to go, I'm willing to take my chance on that.
That is, that's because they've spent the last decade calling 52% of the country fascists.
Yeah, I know. I know.
If you march around saying everyone's a fascist,
Who voted for Brexit? Yeah.
which by the way is a lot of people in those seats, right?
Yes.
If you've got march around saying they're all fascists, when you then say, "Oh, this other guy's a fascist," they'll say, "Well, no, because you said Boris Johnson was a fascist, and you said Theresa May's crew were fascists." So like,
Pretty Patel.
so
Pretty Patel.
according to you, everyone's a fascist. So that's just to me, that's totally lost its meaning.
No, I agree with you. And actually, James, look, on the centre right, I think it's important we do touch on it. Look, there was an interesting thing, Advance UK. There was a lot of talk, obviously, with Rupert Lowe starting Restore Britain. Ben Habib, former deputy chairman of Reform, set up Advance UK. We know that he's got deep pockets. He selected a very high-profile candidate who beat Reform in the mayoral election that last took place, and well, that was an egg on face moment, right? They got fewer votes than the monster raving loony party, so
Yeah.
there is now going to be serious questions. Nigel Farage, kind of actually, that's one test Nigel Farage has now passed, as he can legitimately say to voters, look, you may not love that I've taken too many ex-Conservatives in your view, but we are the only ones who can challenge Labour. Do not throw away this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity by risking it with Advance. You'll be one of 150 people. We've now got that on the board. We can point at it in an area with a high-profile candidate who is well known already in the area, and that was all that he was able to achieve. You've got the Conservatives, as you say. Look, James, I appreciate, I'm not going to deny, 20, 30 years ago, maybe the Conservatives would have come second, but that's how long ago it was. I still think it is bad for the Conservative Party that they're losing deposits. I don't think it's a good sign for the Conservative Party. But I think that the Conservative Party were not on this race. No one was seriously discussing what they were doing. There was a bit of thought. Pollsters did have them at 4 or 5%. They ended up on, just shy of 2. Again, a bit of inaccuracy there. But also, you'd have to say Reform squeeze operation, perhaps. Reform just successfully saying to enough Conservative voters, we're the only game in town if you want Labour. And then we get to Reform, and look, indulge me here. Some people may listen and think I'm biased, but this is my genuine view. You've heard me say it for a long time. This was Labour's sixth safest seat. This is target seat number 440 for Reform UK. Pollsters said they were on 27 to 29%. They hit the 29% mark. And for me, if Reform UK can do that in this type of seat with the demographics they're up against, then I think that should be a huge warning sign in seats that, across the East and West Midlands and also the North East as well and North West, where it's predominantly white British working class Leave voters who voted for the Boris Johnson party in 2019. And actually, not many of them voted Labour. I think a lot of them actually sat at home in 2024. John Curtis's view is that actually Labour's never really recouped a lot of those voters. It was just that a few went back, but most sat out the last election, which is why the Conservative vote went backwards. Or they did make the shift to Reform Party in the 2024 general election already. And I think that, so Reform, I think, can walk away from this and go, we got to, David Ball said 5,000 activists over the course of the 4 weeks have been out and about. So we've stress tested our party machine, the new canvassing app. We've been, putting the pressure on activists to come out. We've obviously learned our lessons from Caerphilly. Now we'll go and learn our lessons from this by-election too. We ran a professional campaign, etc. And I think that it showed a level of professionalisation in Reform's campaign. As you say, I think there was a lot of excitement at the beginning. I think there was then a smart move to actually dampen expectations of how we do. I always thought this was going to be very difficult for Reform to win again on the demographics.
I do think a learning lesson for Reform might be, I speak to the Tories about this. It's much easier to go for a local candidate because it's not direct criticism of Matt, and he will say, Matt Goodwin, the Reform candidate, and he will say, well, I did have connections there. But I think having to spend a week or two explain those connections when you have such a short space of time, I think if you're selecting for a general election and you've got time to go up there a year before and say, actually, I do have a connection and this is what it is, and show you care about the area, I think that's one thing. I think in a by-election, when it's go, campaign straight away, to your point, all people saw of Labour is them having a big internal fight. That's all they saw for 2 weeks. And I think with Reform, Matt had to spend 2 weeks saying, oh, by the way, this is my connection. And so I think, you can see these things as attacks on individuals. They're not. It's simply the case that in a by-election, rightly or wrongly, the simplest thing to do is to have a local candidate. That is the easiest way, because you don't need to spend that time convincing someone's local, because it does tend to be important. by-elections. But
What
I
did you
think
think of
it's
the reform vote? Out of interest, James, the reform result. Do you think reform can walk away happy with that result? They shouldn't be down about it. Yes, they might be disappointed that they were 4,000 votes behind the Greens, but actually on the grand scheme of things, they've hit the markers that many were predicting they were going to hit, so they can walk away with heads held high.
yeah. I think if they'd have come second to Labour, I would have said, oh, they should have done better, whatever the percentage is. I think, but overall, what are you trying to do? You want to reflect your national, you want to hold up your national, you want to say the polls are right. So this vote says the polls are about right. So you can start to say, well, if this happens in these constituencies, we'll win them because this, one of the reasons people like me and you like by-elections and even you like council by-elections is because we get all these polls every week and some of them are accurate and some of them are not, as we've discussed right at the beginning. But then you get, this is real data, this is people voting. People have gone out and said, forget what I've told, YouGov or Comres or whoever opinion, or lots of Merlin strategies, all these posters. Here's my vote, no BS. You see the people who say they're going to vote who don't vote, they didn't vote. The people who were undecided, how did they vote? And so holding up your percentage that exists in the national polls, I think, is big. And so and doing it in a seat which is, as you said, is not a seat. Reform are not going to massively target this seat in a general election. It's reality.
No.
And so they did. Now they put a lot into it to get the 30%. That's also true. But I think therefore you walk away and say, yeah, we hit our numbers. And if you look at the Green vote, you were never going to win that. That was when we talked about this, the left broadly found somewhere to go, and that was the Greens. And if that happened, there's no way a party on the right is winning in that seat.
And so that comes to the sorry, James, knocked over my mic with that excitement of what you were saying there. But that comes to my next point. So this will now, however, ramp up the discussion that you've been saying for a long period of time and you've been saying that you think the thing that will stop reform getting into government is just going to be the level of potential tactical voting that takes place across the country. For example, the SNP will be a home for people to try and stop reform in Scotland in a general election. The Plaid are now obviously have demonstrated already in Caerphilly that they're the home for people to try and stop reform. And now in seats like this, where reform may have sort of snuck through the middle with a split on the left, people are now being sort of educated to find that we have to eventually coalesce around someone if we want to stop reform. Do you think that this is something reform should fear, or is this just a reality of what the Nigel Farage party was going to face?
Well, it's not just a reality for Farage; it's a reality of the new voting world. So, why are people going Green? Because they're not happy with Labour. So you had Labour MPs on today. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Heidi Alexander, the transport.
Oh yeah, this is the most bizarre line.
And they were kind of saying, well, if you combine the Labour and the Green vote, etc. But they seem to be missing the point, which is a lot of the people that were voting for Green, they weren't voting against reform. They were voting against Keir Starmer. They're people who are of the left. They weren't former Tories who said, "Oh, I hate Nigel Farage," or even Lib Dems for that matter. There were people who normally vote for Labour, and they're working out how do we stop Nigel Farage, but fundamentally they were saying, normally we'd do that by voting for the Labour Party, but we don't like you, and so. And to your point of what's going on in Scotland, I think it's just a reality. So, but I think the logical thing is now people are understanding that we're in a multi-party world. We're going to get a discussion of tactical voting, and then we're going to get talk about deals and what all this means. And we don't know where we're going to end up on tactical voting because there's going to be all kinds of programs that come through and all this kind of stuff. And so, I think we'll try and get a pollster on in the next month or so. We're just right at the beginning, I think, of understanding how this breaks out. But I would look at that. Is it definitively just to keep reform out? A little bit, yes. But it's actually the breakdown of the Labour vote,
agreed.
Which I think is happening anyway. People are angry at Labour. If Nigel Farage goes off tomorrow and decides, I've had enough of this, I'm going down the boozer, people aren't going to go and flock back to Labour. That is not going to happen.
No.
And so kind of if you're on the left getting all excited about it or getting all upset on the right, it's kind of pointless because it misses that people are just fundamentally angry and happy. And I think that's why politics is going to be super interesting in the next couple of years because we're going to watch all that play out.
And then the last question is obviously the Liberal Democrats. I mean, what is the point of the Lib Dems? I mean, they are now just being squeezed out of any conversation. And Ed Davey, I'm sure, is going to come under some pressure eventually internally.
Yeah, I think that I saw someone start to call them the Invisible Party today. I think they'll probably be able to counter that a bit at the locals, but I think there are going to be. I agree. I think there's going to be real questions. The Tories already have to deal with them, and Kemi needs to transfer some of her personal popularity, which definitely exists. We can see that in the polling regularly, into Conservative numbers. We'll see that. But I think for the Lib Dems, I think they've got big problems because I think everyone's kind of left them to it, and the media loves the news story, and the Tories aren't a news story. We've been talking about the Tories for a couple of years. I think the news story, to your point, when I heard this today, I think we're going to start to get articles on what is the point of the Lib Dems? Are they an invisible party? Could they disappear without us really knowing? You know, could we wake up at the next election and they've kind of vanished? Because at the moment, their history is a protest vote, and if they're not a protest vote, it's hard. They're definitely not going to form a government, so it's hard to know what they're for.
Exactly. And I think that's all this is going to be so important going forward. And just a reminder, James made the point. I think there was one stat that I wanted to just remind listeners. The last general election, it was about 60%, I think, was the vote share for the two main parties at the last, or 60% plus, 70%, sorry, it was for the two main parties, Labour and Conservative. At this election, it went down to 27% for the two established political parties. It was 60% for the Greens and Reform. So there is something big going on at the moment, and it's a major issue for both Labour and Conservative of how to tackle it. And for Reform and for the Greens, it's about how to transfer current anger and dissatisfaction into belief and optimism and hope and policy and numbers, both in councils
Well,
and devolved elections and parliamentary elections.
Jonathan, I need to now go get my shopping.
Well, look, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you soon, and I'm sure we'll have one hell of a week coming up in Parliament. See you shortly.
Thank you. Bye. Two sets.